Dragon Silver Wizard Gold. Book 1 in the Varthien Saga by Kris Sihto. Chapter 8. Guilt. 643 OM Tarandir. Year of the Hunting Sparrow. Pugton. "She's going to be really annoyed that we're out," Gareth called to his friend. "She's been pacing and fussing for days now, and if I'm gone more than 5 minutes, I get an earful." Norman jogged to catch up with Gareth's long stride. "Yes, but you needed a break. Besides, adventure awaits. Soon you won't be able to even get this. You'll be chained to the cradle, making sure Liz doesn't go insane from lack of sleep." "So exactly like now, then?" Gareth's laughter filled the cavern they were currently exploring. Felicity, his wife of less than a year, was heavily pregnant and had become increasingly demanding as her belly grew. Norman missed Gareth. Once they had been inseparable, two apprentices knocking around, learning beside each other, and then, when they'd both reached majority, moving together into an actual town, sharing a small place for convenience, until Felicity had dragged Gareth into settling down and getting a house to raise a family in. Now Norman barely saw him. Finding this cavern had been a gift, and Norman had leapt at the chance to invite his friend on this picnic/exploration, a sojourn into the darkness. "So, what do you think of my little toy?" Gareth asked, turning to face Norman as he continued to walk forward. "Perfect for camping trips. Liz always complains that the ground is too hard, so I can fit a couple of beds into that pavilion, drag around an entire larder, a bathtub. I've tinkered with the physics so the water will stay in the tub, and there's heating available." "It's interesting. Folds down to a wagon I saw." "It'll fold smaller than that if you really need it to. Pocket-sized block. Folds into the dimensional cracks. I've even spread the mass load over a rough hectare so it's easy to lift." Gareth reached into a fold of his tunic, drawing out a fist-sized grey cube and tossing it. Norman reached up a hand and caught it, fumbling a little when the cube turned out to be lighter than he expected. "I made two. That one's my prototype, so it's got fewer features, but it's still good. Keep it. I'll show you how it all works. Next week, maybe. But today is just us." Gareth hollered into the cave system, the echoes bouncing off the walls and back at them. They walked together through the long cave, at times amazed at the immense space that opened above them, Gareth's light bulb floating up to illuminate the walls and roof at his mental command. The floor was smooth and clear of debris, as if animals had regularly walked this passage over the millennia since it had formed. Small plunks of water dripping into deep pools echoed at them whenever they stopped speaking, and Norman's heart swelled at the thought of his best friend there beside him. Sometimes Norman considered what the world might have been like if he were a girl. Gareth may have looked at him differently. Maybe they would be a couple rather than Gareth being with Felicity. Maybe Norman could have expressed his desires to the vibrant young man beside him. However, that ship had passed, and life had pushed Gareth in the direction of the young woman he had married. Norman was left with an aching pit of yearning in his chest and a resolve to keep himself close, to protect the blossoming family from anything that could cause them pain. Coming to a wide, flat chamber with numerous openings, Norman took a deep breath in. "What do you think we set up for dinner here?" He pulled a tablecloth out of his backpack and shook it open. "Nice flat spot, probably no ants. Romantic atmosphere." Gareth chuckled. It really was a nice spot. The roof was high with striations of colour. Pinks, yellows, reds. Small crystals had formed along some of the stalactites, and they bounced the light around the room in dazzling spots that moved whenever the light bulb moved. "What did you bring us to eat?" Gareth asked. He swiped a hand over his light brown hair to push it out of his eyes. "I could eat an entire horse, I think." "Nothing too grand," Norman said airily, as he first pulled crockery and cutlery from a pocket of his pack, then nonchalantly lifted out a steaming pan of roast beef, a platter of roasted root vegetables, a large bowl of steamed greens, a shepherd's pie. One after another, dishes filled the cloth. First savoury items and sauces, then sweeter food, pastries, creamy chilled flans, fruit platters, all lifted from a small flat pocket on his pack. You don't think you may have prepared a little too much for just the two of us then? Gareth's voice had just a touch of sarcasm, but it was laced with fondness. Then his voice softened. This is good. I needed the space. This is good. As predicted, the picnic was free of ants. The two men chatted amiably, discussing techniques they had discovered and brainstorming new ideas to try. I see your pockets have increased in number, Gareth nudged. Still got the old sniff test going. It's an annoying sense trigger to have, Norman grumbled. How do you replicate the smell of a rainy day? But I got hold of an apothecary in Bakar, and she's going to distill some oils for me, get a good range of fruits and flowers, maybe some herbs. I should be able to lose some of the bulk then and switch to something more compact. He reached into a pocket near his waist, pulled out a whole lemon, gave it a deep sniff, then waved the piles of leftover food and dirty plates to the dimensional pocket on his backpack. You should draw. It's so much easier. I just put a pad in my bag and a stick of charcoal and away I go. Gareth mimed the motion of a pencil in the air, writing an invisible ode into the space around him. Norman rolled his eyes. Gareth sometimes failed to understand that he couldn't just switch to a more convenient sense trigger. What do you do in an emergency? Whip out your pad and draw while your house is burning around you? Face it, your method is slow. There are trade-offs to consider. Pfft, you with your hundreds of pockets, you think you're better. Norman pouted. It's not hundreds, it's 40, and some of them are empty. He patted his floppy right breast pockets for emphasis. The look on Gareth's face said to Norman that he had just proven his point, especially when Norman realised the pocket he had just patted had a lump of pine resin nestled in one corner. Oh, I've been looking for that. Having stowed all their gear away, the two men started walking once more. Choosing a new random direction, they stepped off into a dark tunnel, followed closely by Gareth's light bob. The path branched and branched again, sometimes wide and echoing, sometimes narrowing so that the men had to squeeze sideways through the gaps, and sometimes the ceiling lowered so the men were forced to stoop. The clutter of rubble increased around them, but still a small path wended its way around the boulders and stalagmites. What's that? Gareth pointed to a wall where discolorations appeared to break the layers of sediment. The light bob drifted forward at Gareth's mental command, above and ahead of them, so their shadows would fade from the rock face. There, in the varied hues of ochre, chalk, and charcoal, were crude pictures of two-legged beings chasing animals. Looking for more signs, they could see that the pictures extended further along the passageway, beyond the reach of the light, into the darkness in both directions. Gareth flipped a second light bulb from his pocket. That looks like a picture of a portal, he said, pointing to a space further away. I'm going to check it out. Can you see any other uses of magic back the way we came? The second light bulb wove its way to Norman, who started studying the wall in earnest. The ancient pictures were crumbly, and dust had settled into the imperfections in the surface, making the images hard to make out. Dragons appeared alongside winged humanoids. People on two legs pointed sticks at animals or other people. Crudely drawn charcoal trees burned in red ochre fires. Norman turned to call out his findings to Gareth, but the sound died in his throat as he saw a creature trundle into view at the edge of Gareth's light. It was long and slow, looking somewhat like a smooth, wet lizard. Its glistening skin was red, with paler orange spots that glowed faintly, visible even in the darkness. Gareth, he whispered hoarsely to his friend, who appeared immersed in the contents of the picture before him. Gareth. The thing came further into view, its head shaped like the broad head of an arrow. Milky eyes were set low into the sides of its head, with bulbous lumps behind them that looked to be oozing some sort of clear fluid. With a start, Norman realised he was looking not at a lizard, but a salamander. To be specific, a greater spotted fire salamander. While blind to everything except changes in light and not typically aggressive, Norman had read that they were quite dangerous. He crept forward, trying to reach Gareth silently to alert him to the danger, when his unsuspecting friend suddenly turned to move further down the corridor and tripped, falling headfirst onto the creature. The startled animal opened its wide mouth and hissed, flaps on the side of its head unfurling in a frill and directing those bulbous lumps to exude oily gel onto what it could only have thought was a predator. "Oh, shit," said Gareth, climbing onto his knees and wiping the thick, faintly orange exudate from his eyes. "What's that?" More gel shot from the salamander's poison glands, coating Gareth's torso as he wiped his hands on his pants. "Get back here," yelled Norman, scared for his friend but uncertain how to proceed. "Get away from that thing." "Oh, shit," said Gareth again, stumbling toward Norman while staring at his hands. "I'm feeling weird. This is getting hot." Norman ran to his friend, watching in horror as Gareth's skin reddened and blistered wherever the ooze lay, then started breaking into small flames. Without dropping his eyes from Gareth, he reached for a pocket at his left breast to grab a pinch of powder, and while concentrating in the direction of his friend, let a stream of magic flow as he snorted the powder deep into his sinuses. Too late, he realized that the powder was not the dry, red dirt that would trigger a flow of fresh water. Instead, a gout of searing flame leapt toward his friend, triggered by the cedar ash that had been in the next pocket along. The salamander rushed towards the bright light, excited at the prospect of a freshly cooked meal. Mouth open wide, it grabbed a hold of Gareth's still-burning leg with a strong bite, gripping the muscle with its small conical teeth. With a toss of its head, Gareth's entire calf ripped from the bone and the salamander moved backwards to chew on the large piece of meat. Gareth screamed hoarsely, flame licking down his throat until the sound changed to noiseless gurgles. His clothing burned away, patches of white or red skin showing clearly beside the blackened and charred surface of his face and neck. Fumbling, Norman spilled his pockets onto the ground, scrabbling for the red dirt. Focusing his gaze onto the ground before him, he picked a pinch from the tiny pile in trembling hands, brought to his nose and inhaled sharply. Water engulfed him in a globe as he moved to his friend to douse the flames. Unbreathing, he felt the water bubble and boil around him as he took Gareth in his arms. Then, when not a trace of the searing heat remained, he released his hold on the magic. Gareth was unmoving. Norman held his friend, cradling his head, kissing his hair. It smelled acrid, pungent, unforgettable as the young artificer's breath rattled with each gasp, trying to take in air that was all around but could not reach his lungs. "No, Gareth, no, no," Norman moaned. "We'll fix you. A doctor. We need a doctor." His mind flashed over who would be most capable of help, all the while struggling not to think of Felicity and how she would react. Panic flooded through him as he realized that he had no way of getting Gareth to the surface, and he wasn't even sure he could find his way back through the labyrinth of passages. With the smell of his friend's burning hair in his nostrils, something happened that had never happened before. Unthinkingly, Norman's panic reached a peak, and suddenly he was in a strange room being stared at by a panting, red-faced Felicity lying on her back and her elderly midwife standing in the middle of the room, holding onto a steaming towel. "He needs help, please, anything," Norman screamed at the midwife. The woman patted Felicity's knee. "You just relax there. You've plenty of time yet. I'll take a look at this." "Put him down on the other bed there. Don't mind that it's rumpled. It's mine." Norman barely noticed his surroundings as he gently placed Gareth's trembling body onto the bed. Static played loudly in his ears, and he could feel his pulse shaking his body as his brain looped the image of Gareth on fire behind his eyes. "Who is that, Norman?" Felicity asked from the bed on the other side of the room. He stared at her, wide-eyed. "Norman, are you okay? Who is that?" Felicity repeated. His pulse thrummed in his veins, a distinctive beat pushing his torso, a firm, "Your fault, your fault, your fault," playing in his head. He tried to speak past the stone in his throat. It felt so large that he thought he might never be able to swallow again. He looked into the eyes of Gareth's wife, who in hours would be the mother of Gareth's child, and the stone rose trying to disgorge itself from his body. He turned and ran through the door out of the house, stopping briefly in the garden to vomit the rich meal he had eaten just an hour before running unseeing until he found himself at a stone corner post, staring up at the tower house he had built for the four of them. A surprise he had planned so that they could all stay together. Hot tears ran down his face as he pounded his fists into the stone over and over again, the anger at himself rising, increasing until it reached a peak, and he screamed at himself, wanting to be far from everyone and everything, throwing his fist against the stone as hard as he possibly could, hearing the bones in his knuckles crack. He slumped to the ground, great sobs shaking his body, as the building settled into place in its new location, far from the town it had been in yesterday.